Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I'd like to discuss some of the implications for the strike action which has begun today at Felixstowe. A lot of people may consider this as another strike from workers who've been squeezed for too long and now cannot afford the cost of living. But this one is going to have some serious repercussions and could get very, very interesting if an agreement isn't reached fairly soon. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So a lot of people will have seen news of the latest strike on the BBC. Indeed, a few people have used the BBC article to poke me about it, saying, Phil, what's about this? And in terms of the basics, you'll get what you need there. There was an offer of 7% pay increase for dock workers, plus a £500 lump sum. Ordinarily, very generous offer. Problem is that inflation is already over 10% this year. And it's forecast to hit 13% before we're done. So even with that £500 lump sum, even the lowest paid workers are still getting a below inflation linked pay rise. And by the time this year's done, significantly below. So it's still a pay reduction. And as I've said in the past, if this year were a one-off, you would take it with the promise that employers would try and make up for it over the next few years. You know, it's a tough year, lads. Inflation's gone sky high. It's not our fault. Let's just tighten our belts and over the next few years, we'll make it up to you. Okay. But dock workers, like lots of others on low incomes, have actually been enjoying effective pay cuts for years now. It's reached breaking point. But I'm not going to go on about the reasons for the strike in this video because they're the same reasons lots of other workers are striking. I've already discussed them before in detail, may do again before it's all over. But this particular strike has some rather far-reaching consequences. See, someone prodded me on Twitter to say surely the government would have to take this seriously, and you would certainly think so. But this strike was announced over 3 weeks ago. That the government have not powered into action to try and avert it suggests that they don't care. Either that or they simply don't understand the impact of this strike. Felixstowe is not anything like as famous as, say, Dover, but it's a crucial container port. Last year, it had a certain amount of chaos itself as we struggled to get forwarders to move the containers coming in onto other parts of the country. Most people would go, what's this, Phil? We don't know anything about this. No, because the mainstream media didn't really know what to do with the story. But it caused huge bills to rack up for the owners of the containers. Because while they're just stood there doing nothing, you still have to pay for them to be stored, to looked after. And they're not going anywhere. They're not going to the customer. You know, many were just abandoned because it was just costing too much to pay for the storage. And there was a shortage of freight forwarders to shift them. Well, we're going to see the same thing happening here, but for different reasons. Obviously, with action like this planned, there's no way that anyone wants to deliver containers to Felixstowe now. What would be the point? They'll just get stuck there. The owners would have to pay to have them just lying on the quay and no way of getting them delivered to their intended destinations. So they'll be trying to take them elsewhere. Last year, a lot of them were taken to Rotterdam or Antwerp to ease the problems. I gather the same thing's likely to be happening here. And you may think, well, fine. But those docks are also managing large demand. And I gather from Lodestar, which is the logistics trade journal, they're also having industrial disputes of their own to cope with. So there's no real safe workaround for this sort of trade. You know, they quoted a forwarder who was concerned that this could hit half of all deep sea trade. Because offloading it to another dock, okay, you've got some delays there, but you offload it to an EU dock now that we've left the EU, that means more paperwork, thanks to Brexit. That means more delays on top. You know that trade that the Tories tell us is going to compensate for our Brexit losses, because that's what they're talking about, this so-called deep sea trade, the trade from elsewhere outside of Europe. So not only is the trade now way more expensive due to the higher cost of oil just to transport it, but supply chain problems are also increasing the cost. The longer the container just sits around, the more expensive the goods inside it become. Fees are levied on the container just for sitting around. And if the unreliability of this process becomes more expected, if it happens more often, people will have to charge more for those goods from the outset to cover the extra cost of storage. Otherwise, they won't bother exporting. because they can't afford to keep facing those bills while they're waiting for it to be taken away by forwarders. In a nutshell, it's going to mean more delays in getting goods to where they've been ordered in Britain. We already have supply chain problems. This is going to add to them, as well as the costs. Now, because these goods are coming in from outside Europe, we're not really going to be talking about large quantities of food or medicines, but it will include electrical goods, as well as electrical and mechanical components for our own manufacturing. And going on strike for a week doesn't just mean a week's delay. It'll take some considerable time longer to sort out the mess afterwards and get back on an even keel. And that's, if there's no subsequent agreement, I'm assuming there'll be some sort of agreement. If there's no agreement, then there's going to be another strike down the line as well. And that strike is likely to expand to other container ports. What then? Right, old mess. And coming as we begin the build up to the final third of the year, this is when trade ramps up ahead of Christmas. And when it comes to anything to do with container ports or freight forwarders, you don't really see much of a deal being made about it in the mainstream media, so most people aren't really going to know what's going on. It's one of those classic unsexy aspects of trade. Sorry, freight forwarders, you ain't sexy. It'll never interest the public, but it does have a massive impact on their household expenditure. This is going to be one of those hidden costs because the media can't really be arsed with it. People will see costs going up as a direct result of a failure to come to terms with workers here, but they'll not really know why because it's not really explained. But you would still think it's in the government's interest to deal with it, because ultimately, if more people feel the squeeze on budgets, they're going to look to the government to deal with it. Must be mad to be allowing all these problems to accrue all at once, when they're already sitting on a knackered economy and we're talking about widespread industrial action. Something like this, you would think they'd want to get on top of it immediately. Maybe ministers don't really appreciate the importance of this sort of trade any more than the public do. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.